Hi, my name's Lauren. I am really excited that you're here. I'm the Marketing Communications Manager for NCCS. Wow, it's been a crazy couple months. I can't just, wow. So, I am really excited that you have carved out the time to do this and to learn more and to grow with us all together, even though it's at home. And I thought about you guys especially. I mean, we think about you guys all the time, but I thought about you guys especially because in April I received news that I had a benign brain tumor, and then the next day I got surgery for it alone in the hospital, and after that it's been like 5 million appointments, as you know. And every time I go to those appointments or that scan or whatever it is, I think about how you guys are having our CPAT Symposium scheduled in the midst of all of this and all that scary stuff that you've been through and overcome and learned from, and are inspiring other people for it and advocating for better care, because there needs to be. And so, and by the way, my path came back normal, but I know that you guys have also had really scary results, and I respect you even more for it. So I'm really glad that you're here. I can't wait for the rest of the sessions and to learn more from you guys, and we love you.
Hello, and welcome to our Advocacy in Action panel. I am thrilled to moderate this session, which includes our CPAT All-Star advocates who are each involved in great projects and they're working to improve cancer care in their communities. And as to kick off the session, I really wanted to understand more about you all and our audience right now, and how long you've been involved in advocacy. So there's going to be a poll popping up on the screen, and there's multiple choice. And so if you would, please click on what option reflects how long you've been involved in advocacy. So if it is 10 or more years, or 5 to 10 years, 3 to 5 years, 1 to 3 years, or perhaps you're brand new to the advocacy world, we welcome you with open arms if that's the case, and I'm excited to hear. All right. I can't see the results. Can any of you on the panel?
I cannot.
Okay. Well, we will try again with the polling in just a little bit, but I'll go ahead and kick it off. I'm so excited, like I said, to be joined by, we have Lisa Rice, Doris Cardwell, Bradley Glassel, Kimberly Richardson, and Allison Rosen with us today. And through their work with NCCS and the CPAT program, I've gotten to know all of these amazing people pretty well. And I am just in awe of the great work that you all do and the energy you bring to your work and to NCCS. And I wanted to begin with our NCCS board member, Lisa Rice. So Lisa, would you take a couple minutes to introduce yourself and tell us how you got involved in the advocacy world?
Sure. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lisa Rice, and as Lindsay said, I'm a member of the NCCS board for a little less than a year now. CPAT member for, I can't remember how many years. And I'll say that my road to policy advocacy came via my role as patient advocate, which stemmed from caring for my parents when they were ill and dying when my father died, and then also advocating as a patient advocate for my best friend who was diagnosed with metastatic breast cancer. And I advocated for her up to and until her death, which is the same year that my mother's second breast cancer was diagnosed. At the time, she was in the throes of advanced Alzheimer's. And so I had to make all of her medical decisions. So very much patient-oriented work, but I have a background in corporate marketing and customer communications, and also political action and advocacy in both financial services and the retail industries. So those things sort of crossed, and somewhere along the line, I morphed into a cancer policy advocate. You can probably point the finger at Shelley, and I will. um, and I started there really as a one-on-one coach with people, with survivors or advocates, helping them shape their story and get more comfortable with telling their story concisely so that they could take their messages to their legislators on Capitol Hill. And I'm not sure how it happened, but at some point, I was asked to go with people. So I go with people. I'm a patient advocate, policy advocate, coach, handholder, um, and all of that up until 2017, when my role morphed again and I became an advocate for myself when I was diagnosed with cancer. Um, so I won't say that this is where my profile ends, because who knows what's going to happen in the future. But I really, really am dedicated to NCCS. I'm dedicated to the policy mission. I am a policy geek. I'm not quite a policy wonk, but I'm almost there. So that's me, and welcome everyone.
Thanks, Lisa.
You're welcome.
Fellow policy geeks. I'll hand it over to Bradley to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about how you got involved in advocacy.
All right. Well, hello, everybody. So Brad Glassel, I am in the Milwaukee area of Wisconsin, and I was diagnosed with stage 3 prostate cancer in 2016 and went through treatment and everything for that year. And I was having some kind of tough times, and I really didn't feel I had a community or any way to kind of talk to other people and such. And by accident, I found out about a camp in Colorado called Epic Experience, and I attended that. That's a camp for cancer survivors. And it was a real game changer for me, because all of a sudden, again, I had this community of people who understood and I could talk to and such. And after that, I did participate in a couple other groups. But what I found is the experiences I had are similar to others, where they don't know of these different activities, different groups, different things to go to, and they're not necessarily therapy. They're just, a community that's out there. And I think that's really important. And so I had gotten involved in a lot of different volunteer aspects. I'd volunteer for different groups and such. And then I did stumble across NCCS. And I'm a little bit of a political news junkie, and looking at the advocacies that way. I was looking at joining basically the group, and was looking at going to the Week on the Hill and such. And then the advocacy ambassador program popped up, and I turned in an application for that, and I was accepted to that. So my concept of what I looked at for it is, again, how do you publicize all of these different things out there so that cancer survivors know about them? Because there's just a lot of great things out there. And so attended the sessions and started working on that. And it was a good start. And my first concept was to link the groups together, and that wasn't going so good. And then we had some follow-up sessions and one-on-ones, and I say I did a 180, not a 360 on it, and decided to form a nonprofit. And what I decided was a self-funded nonprofit, not a 501c3, because one of the things that happens with organizations is they compete for funding a lot of these small organizations. So I didn't want to be a competitor that way, and I felt I could do it on a smaller level. So I've created an organization called Brad's List, and I have a website called Brad's List, and it's bradslist.info. somebody with Brad's list was taken on an org. So .info. And so that is, again, publicizing the different organizations. NCCS as one of them because of all the great guides they have, the different participations and things. And then what I'm looking at doing is getting out and publicizing that. I worked, in order to keep the cost down, I did all the website and everything myself, which is an incredible learning experience. Talking about, doing competitions and things like Isabella talked about in the past. I did that on my own. Doing a website is like that if you've never done it. And so it was a real challenge for me of a little step every day. It took me a couple months. And what has kind of held me back a little bit is now with COVID, I can't go out there and really go face to face in the different organizations like cancer centers and such. But hopefully soon I'll be able to do that. And so that's kind of the basics of how I got involved in it. And it's kind of funny in advocacy and attending these things, I don't know if it's more to help them or to help me. So that's how I feel about it.
Thanks, Brad. I love how you experienced a gap in care, and that was sort of the catalyst for your work in advocacy. So thank you for that. Kimberly, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us how you got into advocacy world, and also share how long you've been in advocacy?
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm from Chicago, Illinois, and I was diagnosed with a rare form of ovarian cancer, granulosa cell tumor, in 2013. And I like to think that I came to advocacy because of the relationship I had with my oncologist during my treatment. It was not pleasant. That's the best way I can say it. And back in 2013, in terms of granulosa cell tumor, there wasn't a lot of information on the internet. And I couldn't get a lot of information out of my oncologist. I felt like I was making a lot of decisions surely based on just what she was saying. I didn't think it was any shared decision making, so to speak. And when I got healthy enough to start participating in different forms of advocacy, every step of the way, I kept figuring out what was missing, all the gaps that seemed to be missing. I started out in awareness advocacy and doing volunteer work for fundraising for 5K races. And when I mentioned to that non-for-profit group that I wanted to do more awareness around African-American women with ovarian cancer, I was blatantly told that the data just didn't bear that out. And I didn't really understand what that meant, because here I am, an ovarian cancer survivor, and I'm African-American. So I'm one data point, if nothing else, right? And so I decided I needed to move forward and not just get involved just only in awareness advocacy, but move on to policy advocacy. And I got involved with the Ovarian Cancer Research Alliance and going to Capitol Hill and talking to elected officials about funding for cancer research. And one of the things, again, that struck me about how we do policy advocacy is that we don't really know a lot about the research. We're asked to go and to talk and to persuade on legislative asks, but I often ask myself, at any given time during this little 10 minutes that I have with this staffer, if they ask me something very specific about the research, what am I going to say? Because I didn't know a lot about ovarian cancer research, and I certainly wasn't finding still a lot more information about granulosa cell tumor and who was doing that research. It's a lot on high-grade serous ovarian cancer, but not so much about the subtypes. And so I think that's what helped me to navigate toward the research advocacy side of things. I had that background as a adjunct professor in urban sociology. I was doing economic development research in my prior life prior to being diagnosed. And so when I got the opportunity to apply to the Elevate Ambassador Program, I sort of feel like that's where I truly found my niche in research advocacy.
Thank you so much, Kimberly. And we are so honored to have you as an Elevate ambassador. And I'm excited to hear more about your experience in the Elevate program in just a little bit. I would like to now introduce Doris Cardwell. Doris, take it away.
Well, my name is Doris. I am a 13-year inflammatory breast cancer survivor. And I'm kind of like Kimberly in that when I got diagnosed, there wasn't a lot of information that I felt like pertains specifically to me. So I started out advocating for myself, really. And then I ended up working in the cancer center I was treated at in their survivorship, developing their survivorship and advocating for services for other patients and caregivers. And now I live in Spearfish, South Dakota, and I decided after moving to Spearfish that I wanted to get involved on a state level. So I have been on the State Cancer Coalition for about 3 years now. But when I saw Elevate ambassador applications through NCCS, it opened a whole new world to me. Sitting in the conference room there, learning about advocacy on a policy level, I can honestly say I got bit by the policy bug. And so I guess I fell into this, but going to Capitol Hill and speaking to lawmakers, I think that was probably one of the most meaningful things that I felt like I have done in the 13 years since I've been a survivor. So I appreciate the opportunity you guys give us to do that.
Thanks, Doris. Another amazing Elevate ambassador. And from there, you got involved in so many other things that I'm excited to talk about today. So Alison Rosen, you are our spectacular AYA advocate. Go ahead and take it away, introduce yourself, and share how you got into advocacy.
Sure. I'm honored to be here. And my name is Allison Rosen. I am an 8-year colorectal cancer survivor. And I know I got started in advocacy because sitting in the waiting room when I was going through colorectal cancer treatment, no one looked like me. And I say that because I was very young. Everyone in the GI department looking around me thought my mom was a patient, not myself. My mom was my caregiver. And so I really felt alone when I was first diagnosed. And I was trying to figure out where I could belong, where I could get help. And so through MD Anderson Cancer Center in Houston, where I'm from and where I got treated, I found out about a program for AYAs. And they have it's sort of like you go on trips to connect with other AYAs once a month, every other month. And so I went on this sort of trip with other adolescents and young adults with one of my friends who I brought along, and it opened my eyes to the fact that I wasn't alone. There were other people that were my age that were going through cancer treatment just like me, and I joined an adolescent and young adult advisory council there and found out about so many other things. I attended a conference, and that's where I met everyone at NCCS, and they told me about policy work, and I had never considered the fact that my story actually would make a difference and help others. And then they told me it did. And so I signed up and I went to CPAT that year, and it really changed my whole perspective on everything and the power of the patient voice and the power that your story has and how it can make a huge difference. So my background is actually in cancer research. I'd worked in cancer research for 12 years when I was diagnosed. So I have a very sciencey mind. And so now after going through cancer treatment, I realized that I have that science mind and I have the patient perspective. And so policy seemed like the natural next step. And so if I can make a difference for all the 18 to 39-year-olds that are going through cancer treatment who feel like they don't want to get lost or they're going to get lost in a cancer center, that no matter the size or where they're getting treated, their voices matter, especially with survivorship, because I've always told people I have a lot of life left to live. And so the long-term side effects that I and every AYA has to deal with are something I'm really passionate about. And like Brad said earlier, I started in all of this advocacy to help others, but in turn, it helps me and is definitely 100%, I can say, has helped heal me from everything that I went through throughout my cancer journey.
Thank you so much, Allison. It's amazing to hear about how you all got involved in advocacy initially, because now that I work with you on a regular basis, it just is like you're an advocate all-star and you're very savvy in research advocacy or policy piece. And, it's great to hear about how you started. And most of you, it came from, identifying what you wish your experience was like, or how you want the cancer experience to be better for other people. And I love that. So I mentioned a poll earlier, and now we have the results. So they're going to pull up on the slide here now. And it looks like a majority of participants today have been in the advocacy world for quite some time, so 10 plus years, which is fantastic. But we also have, 23% of attendees who are brand new to advocacy. And so that is really great to hear. And it's one of the reasons why we wanted to do 3 separate tracks for this symposium experience. We are really missing seeing you all in person, but being able to have the 3 breakout sessions that are tailored to your level of advocacy, whether you're just starting out or whether you've been involved in advocacy for 10 or more years, they're going to be breakout sessions for you. And so I'm excited that hearing from this panel of advocates is really going to be the foundation to kick us into several days of learning from experts in cancer care and public policy, so that we can all use our voice to improve cancer care for everyone. So now I will go into some more questions that I have for this amazing panel. Allison, I'm so curious. You are, a young cancer survivor, and just last week, I attended the CancerCon virtual conference for the first time, and you mentioned that that's how you were connected with NCCS. And I had heard about this, big conference for years, and finally was so excited to get to attend myself. And I'm just curious, what is your experience in the AYA community with advocacy, and how do you see that kind of differing from the bigger picture of advocacy in general?
Yeah, I think that the AYA community is unique. And I went to that stupid cancer conference and I met you guys. And I think we're unique because a lot of times we fall through the cracks. I was told that by my oncologist, that he didn't want me to fall through the cracks because of my age. We have sort of um, unique perspective when it comes to survivorship, because we have to deal with, and I know we heard a speaker earlier talk about fertility, career, college. The long-term side effects that I have, I could name, and it probably would be more fingers than I have. And so I think getting involved on the AYA level is so important, so they see young people using their voice and their journey for a powerful reason. And so I didn't realize that my story mattered. And I think the more stories we collect and the more stories that our policymakers get to hear, the more change we can make happen. And I know that, I'm one of many people that are advocates in the AYA field. And I think collectively we can all make such a huge difference for that next patient that's sitting in a waiting room and feels like they're alone.
Thanks, Allison. Yeah, we definitely don't want anyone falling through the cracks. And I love that you've, transformed your experience into working for others so that that doesn't happen. Kimberly, you talked about your experience in research advocacy, and that's a very, specific part of the advocacy world that's, incredibly important. But I think it's also very intimidating because, like you said, there's just so much data and research and information that, even on just one type of cancer, much less being an advocate for cancer care in general. And what I love about your advocacy work is that you're someone who, you'll just keep knocking on doors until someone answers. And then you open this one specific door with a researcher who really wants to connect with patients. And then that just launches into a project, and where you're really, boots on the ground making change. And so can you talk a little bit about what your strategy is for kind of going for the cancer, the research policy piece?
Well, I think one of the things I think is so important for cancer survivors, caregivers, patient advocates to understand about the scientists or the researchers is that they're closer to us than we actually think. I think sometimes we feel as the cancer survivor that the researcher is so far removed from us, right? That they're in some lab trying to figure all this stuff out. And that is true. But they also are human beings who have these great stories and reasons why they're cancer researchers. Just like we have our story, they have theirs. And I'm reminded of the first time we did a lab visit at the University of Illinois Cancer Center. And it was about 12 cancer survivors of all different cancer types. We were in the cancer biology lab. And one of the researchers, students, was talking about his research and talking about how laborious it can be sometimes, just thinking about a hypothesis and trying to get to the end and then realizing, oh, there might be this little piece that's off and my results don't come out the way I thought they would. And one of the survivors actually said to him, wow, you sit here every day in and day out, trying to figure out the answer to this one question, and it may lead you down all these different pathways. And how do you stay connected to this work? And how do you want to do this day in and day out? And his response was, because my grandmother was diagnosed and died from ovarian cancer. And this is my reason for being in cancer research. And I think in that connective moment, that's where we all sort of was like, we really are in this all together, right? And it wasn't like this, schmoozy kind of, oh, that was so fluffy kind of feeling. It was very powerful. And so when we were all leaving, we were like, oh, thank you for the lab visit. But yet some of the students held back and said, hey, how can we continue this? How can we make this more reality, everyday kind of thing? And so I think sort of trying to get back to the question is just making sure that patients and caregivers and survivors of all type that keep in mind that these are human beings that are doing this kind of research, and never be intimidated about how much you think you know about the scientific inquiry part of it. You can start with just the question. You can just ask them questions, and they are so interested in wanting to talk to you. And just to know that from the very beginning of any type of research advocacy you get involved in, that the researchers are interested in talking to you. They are interested in knowing your perspective.
Thank you, Kimberly. I really like the advice of, don't be intimidated, don't be afraid to ask questions, because research advocacy in the research field can be very intimidating and can seem really esoteric. And what is interesting is that we got a question about what is AYA, and here I am talking about how research can be so complicated and convoluted when we all throw around this, like the cancer language and vernacular that we use all the time and take for granted that not everyone knows what AYA is and why would they. So Allison, do you want to talk about what AYA is?
Sure. AYA stands for adolescent and young adults. And in the oncology space, that's 18 to 39-year-olds. And, there's pediatric cancer, and then there's people over 39. And so that 18 to 39 is specific in the policy advocacy space as adolescent and young adults.
And we always joke in DC, it's like alphabet soup with all of the acronyms and stuff that we all use all the time. And so speaking of the DC world and the Hill, Lisa, can you talk more about your legislative advocacy experience? We're going to have our Hill Week. It'll be our first ever virtual Hill Week next week. We're going to have some breakout sessions and plenaries talking about what that looks like now during the time of COVID. But, and you mentioned that you have been a mentor to a lot of new advocates as they go to the Hill and have meetings with their policymakers and members of Congress and the staff. So can you talk about what's the best advice for our new advocates going into Hill Week?
I'll do that. But first, I have to say, I did not realize that Kimberly on this panel is KD. Is that you?
That is me.
Shit. Oh my God. That's hilarious. Oh my gosh. I follow her on Twitter and she follows me. Didn't know. Okay, I'm sorry. Back to what was it? What am I?
Kimberly's on Twitter.
Okay. Oh, word of advice. Oh,
so what advice would you give for a new person going into Hill Week?
Yeah, I would say when you're preparing, whether that's by yourself or maybe with a family member, make sure that you write everything out. You'd be amazed at how many times you will write and rewrite before you get it concise. And so that's the main prep advice that I would give you, is to give yourself time to write and rewrite, and bullet points or whatever works for you. You know what works for you. I would say in the room, don't forget to breathe. I know that sounds really elementary, but it's so powerful to relax yourself, make eye contact. Even, I know all of this is virtual, but still take your time in saying what you want to say. Don't rush your message. And silence is okay. Pauses are okay. Breathe, relax, because you're the expert in the room on your mission, your story, what it's taken to get you to the advocacy role. You're the expert. That other person is the expert on whatever area they work on, healthcare, or it could be something else that's related to cancer policy, depending upon who you're meeting with. But you're the expert, and don't forget that. That's, breathe and relax. You're the expert.
Thanks, Lisa. I love that advice. And, telling your story is such a huge piece of the policy and legislative advocacy work. And so next week we have a breakout session on how to tell your story in a nutshell, how to, an expert is going to be like walking you through steps on this amazing worksheet that you can, use in the future to make sure that your story is succinct and successful and helps you tailor it to different audiences. So if you're new to advocacy and interested in Hill Week, that'll be a great session for you. Doris, I would love to hear more about your experience in the Elevate project. But first, I wanted to also give a shout out to our very rural advocate. You are a superstar anyway, but in your community, you're in South Dakota, and I think that your advocacy efforts look a little bit different from the rest of us. So would love to hear your perspective as living in a rural area and doing advocacy work.
Okay, let me think about that for a second. I guess the biggest difference that I see being in a more rural area is that we don't have a teaching hospital in our part of the state. And so I came from an area that was survivorship was common. Places had been developing active survivorship programs, and then I moved to an area where survivorship is sort of just becoming a term that people are familiar with. Because I'm in a part of the state that doesn't have, not only do we not have a teaching hospital, we only have one major medical facility in my end of the state. So it really does feel like you are more isolated. And I joined the State Cancer Coalition to sort of help me make connections and gain some credibility in hopes that using resources that have available through NCCS to be able to develop some survivorship programming in my community, because right now we really don't have very much for cancer survivors at all that is closer than an hour away. So that does make things look different.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned the State Cancer Coalition. Can you talk a little bit more about that and how you got connected with your State Cancer Coalition? It's a program through the CDC. Will you explain what that's like?
So I got involved with the State Cancer Coalition because when I moved to South Dakota, I was like, okay, how do I start over as an advocate? How do I get my feet up under me? And so I did some Google research, and I ended up connecting with the State Cancer Coalition. And so I would really recommend to anyone who's interested in advocacy at any level to reach out to your state coalition to find out more about what they do. They sort of set the cancer narrative for the state. And at first, when I got involved, I thought, well, this is not making very much difference. Like my time commitment is just a couple of meetings a quarter, telephone meetings, Zoom meetings. And in the beginning, I thought, well, I don't think that this is really making much of an impact. But currently, I'm on the steering committee. And when I look at the list of people who are on the steering committee, I'm the only one listed as a cancer survivor. And so to echo what everybody is saying, letting our stories be heard is very powerful, especially when you're working with people who have not been in your position. We all know that until you walk a mile in somebody's shoes, you really don't know what it's like. So I view my work with the State Cancer Coalition as an opportunity to sort of make a bridge between people who work in cancer and people who are directly affected by cancer.
Yeah, and NCCS is a national partner in the Comprehensive Cancer Control Network that oversees the state coalitions. And so we have a great resource on our website if you're interested in getting more information or getting involved in your state cancer coalition. Brad, I know that you are an Elevate ambassador, so I would love to hear your experience with the Elevate project and what's that like. I know that Brad's list is your project that came out of that endeavor, and so can you talk us through what your experience with that is like?
Yeah, so again, you guys sponsored me to come to the DC area to meet with everyone else. I believe there was a dozen of us to work on the projects, and that was just so huge to be in that room with all these people who were doing these incredible things, and to take that time and give your pitch on what you're looking at, or get the feedback back and forth and what you're looking at, and getting that input from everybody was just invaluable. And really, it's such an inspiring area to be in. NCS, such an inspiring organization, and then everybody else around. So it was one of those things where I think you go there and you say, well, yeah, I got a little something I want to do. And then you get there and you're like, oh my gosh, this is really big. And yeah, I can make a difference and I can do something. And it's kind of funny when we were listening to Isabella before, and I've been involved in some athletic endeavors that are about 5 steps below her, huge steps below her. But how that is, I think, in advocacy, a lot of the same thing, step by step, moving along. And it can be a big chunk to bite off to do something, but it doesn't have to be all at once. And one of the things I thought of with that on my own, in my endeavors that way, athletic or then in these things, is to set your own pace, to work at what you can accomplish and how you can. And getting into these things, it may become a big project, but you may just take it one step at a time, get involved in this thing, move on to the next. And it was the Elevate Ambassador program was, I don't think I would have done what I did without that. I know I wouldn't have.
Thanks, Brad. That's so great to hear. And actually, Brad is a lot of times in the Elevate cohort that he was in is the lone gentleman in the group. And so that was something that we noticed as we were developing our agenda for the symposium. And so Brad and is going to be co-moderating a breakout session entitled A Few Good Men. And so we're interested in getting more men in the advocacy world and kind of addressing, what are some of the barriers and how can we be more welcoming to men in the advocacy community. So if you're interested in that, that's going to be next week on track 3. Kimberly, I know that you were also an Elevate ambassador. Can you tell us more about your project through the Elevate team?
Yeah, that was actually one of the best experiences I have had as an advocate.
Wow.
A really good friend told me about the application process, and I applied and was really grateful to be selected to come to DC and be with that great group of the first cohort. I ambitiously, however, came up with 3 ideas. And then once we were in DC, I was like, oh, they expect us to actually do to do all this stuff. So I was like, wow, I put 3 things down. But I'm grateful. I'm extremely grateful for having put those 3 things down in writing, because what the Elevate Ambassador Program actually does for you is it helps you as an advocate to get the things that are in your mind onto paper and to watch those things, as Brad said, step by step, month by month over that year come to fruition. I said I wanted to do a lot around survivors and scientists, and that was all around my models, right? All around my 3 ideas. And part of the program components, of course, is for all of us to sort of talk out what we're going to do. And then Mary and the team sort of walk you through step by step. Well, what does this mean? Help you be more specific and more strategic about every action step. And so when I look back over that experience to see where I came from in 1 year is why I'm like the super fan of the Elevate Ambassador Program, because I was able to garner the courage. I decided to ask my representative here in Chicago to help me file a resolution to start a commission on gynecological cancer. And that's just one person just saying, here's the data. I think that this is important. I think that there are some disparities as it relates to funding across cancer types. And I think that gynecological cancer gets the short end of the stick when it comes to funding, and that we should be looking not so much to the national level, but to start looking at this statewide, and where is the money flowing and how is it distributed for gynecological cancer. And luckily for me, my representative, his mother is an 80-year-old ovarian cancer survivor. I mean, how lucky could I have possibly had gotten with working with someone who wants to help me spearhead this commission? But again, as an advocate, as a cancer patient, once you're finished with your diagnosis, you don't really think that you have the capacity, or you think that you're this one person and you can't make a difference, when in fact you can. And that's what being a part of this program really did show me. I think when I got into advocacy, I always saw myself as part of the group. We all go down the Capitol Hill and we all speak to our individual elected officials. and you don't see the money change in terms of, funding, and you ask yourself, well, what collectively or individually did I do this funding cycle, right? But when you can do something individual, which the Elevate Ambassador Program allows you to do, then you can truly see your worth as the advocate. You can truly see your own potential of where you can go. And so, yes, that was one program, and I've been able to develop a Cancer Thriving Survivor course where I talk with cancer survivors about everything from mindfulness to exercise and nutrition, everything about self-management. One of the things we find is we go through this process where we're told what to do by an oncologist. And once you ring that bell on that last chemo treatment, they go, see ya, stay healthy. And you're like, well, what do I do now? And you sort of forget that you were this self-managing human being before diagnosis. You became so dependent on the chemo and so dependent on the healthcare system that when you get out, you're struggling again. You're back to this place where you don't know how to make simple decisions for yourself. And so creating that process and creating that 6-week course, you find your way back to some level of confidence. And then thirdly, my third idea was how can we fill in the gap between what we learn as survivors and caregivers and patient advocates as it relates to the scientific inquiry. Most of the stuff that's on the internet, when I tuned into it to get the certificate, I'd go, if this is where we're supposed to start, a lot of cancer survivors are going to be overwhelmed. Because I had already had a postgraduate experience with scientific research, it didn't overwhelm me, it didn't throw me off, but I thought about, this is the gap. We need to find things that can make scientific research easier to understand. And so I was able to partner with some MD, PhD students to create some training modules that start from the beginning. What is a hypothesis? And then helps the survivor and the patient advocate get to how to read a scientific poster. Oftentimes as advocates, we go to these scientific and medical conferences on scholarship, and we go to the sessions and they seem overwhelming. And we try our very best not to go in the exhibit hall because the poster sessions are like, what's on these posters? I don't get it. And this is my opportunity to fill in that gap, to say, prior to these conferences, take in this information on these training modules, and now you can have some questions that you can ask the researcher about that particular poster. And so this is where I feel that that's where my niche is, and that's what the Elevate program helped me to do. Figure out where are the gaps in research advocacy and how do we help empower and educate survivors and caregivers and new patient advocates as it relates to research advocacy. So I'm super fan of the Elevate program, and I'm just grateful to see who's going to be in the program next year and all the things that they're going to do with their program ideas.
Thanks, Kimberly. We're so grateful and glad that you're part of the Elevate program. And I think what you just said really highlights that there are so many different ways that you can engage in advocacy, and all of you have a wealth of experience and knowledge and how to do that. And, whether it's through legislative advocacy or state work or individual projects and opportunities. And there's also other ways, like Lisa was talking about earlier, sharing your story. And we have worked with her on several blog posts of sharing her story, through writing articles. And I think that's also a big important piece of what we do in the advocacy world. So Lisa, can you talk about how you did that and why you wanted to share your story to do advocacy work.
Yeah. The first blog piece that I wrote for NCCS was actually about my mother's second diagnosis and the kind of advocate I was for her. I didn't realize, because I am, people talk about the tiger mom, I'm the tiger daughter. And so I didn't realize that people didn't act very aggressively. I was aggressive. I told the doctor no to this, no to that, convince me of this, convince me of that. And those details are shared in the blog piece. But, Shelley and I were talking about that, and she said, Lisa, you need to write this down, because it does help for other people to see, so many people are intimidated by the white coat. And while I respect the education and I respect their experience, the doctor doesn't know my mother and doesn't know her experience. And so what came naturally to me, I realized I needed to share that, because I didn't know that everybody wasn't a tiger daughter. So that's how I ended up writing the one about the experience in advocating for my mother. And then I wrote another piece, it was later that year, but about something that had happened a couple of years earlier, when my best friend, who, she and I had planned to be the old geezers in the bar. We'd met each other in 5th grade, and unfortunately she was diagnosed with metastatic breast cancer. And she asked some very specific things of me to help her during her last whatever. We didn't know how much time it was. And so I think as friends, we often don't know what we can do. And so years before, I had helped her when she was researching buying an SUV. And the guy said to her, now, why don't you just take this home for the weekend and you'll like it, And I said to her, look, what's my role supposed to be? Is my role supposed to be saving you from yourself so you don't spend this money? And she said, absolutely. I said, then don't take the daggone thing home for the weekend, because it'll be yours. You'll be attached to it. But that's, the kind of thing that I did with her and for her. Found out specifically what is my role supposed to be. And so I put that in the piece that I wrote for the blog. And years later, so that the experience was in 2013 and 14. I wrote the blog piece in 2016. And just recently, a family member found it, shared it with a bunch of my cousins, and one cousin said, oh, wow, I need to figure out if I'm this kind of ride or die friend. And so I still hear a lot about those pieces. And so I'm glad that I've written them. The next step Shelley has asked me to do this, and I keep saying, yeah, I will. And the next one I'll write will be about my experience, and you'll hear about the tiger patient, because boy, oh boy, I was very me in my experience. So that'll be the next one that I write.
I love that. I look forward to reading that and hearing your story. And I also think that tiger patient could be a trending hashtag by the end of the day.
No, right?
So as we get to the end of this session, I also just want to say for participants, if you have any questions you'd like to ask the panel, please submit those into your chat box. But I want to quickly go around, I would say go around the virtual room here, and would love to hear, what is your one piece of advice that you would give someone starting out, maybe not starting out in the advocacy world, any level of advocate? Like, what's your best piece of advice for being a successful advocate? Who wants to go first? Go for it.
I'll go first.
Go ahead, Doris.
Sorry. I think my biggest piece of advice would be never underestimate the power of your story, because you never know how much your story is going to impact someone. And just like Kimberly said, she had no idea the personal connection the person she was speaking to would have to what her end game was, what her goal was. So never underestimate the fact that your story has power, and sharing it can not only empower you, but empower those around you to be able to do things that make a difference to them. So please don't be quiet and think that your story is unimportant, because it is not. It is very important, and it can help move mountains.
Thanks, Doris. That's great advice. Brad, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I think similar as in don't underestimate what you have to offer. I think people may be intimidated and say, what can I do? You know, what can I really offer in this? And boy, if you try, it's so much, and don't be intimidated by it. You can accomplish something so much with it. Just go for it.
Great.
I'd
Love
also
that.
say, I'm going to steal from Mary from Elevate. She always talked to us about the power of one and what that truly, truly means. You know, as my colleagues have said, it's power in that, but also as you get into advocacy, and it can be cliquish, and it can be, you know, if you don't go along with the program sometimes. I mean, sometimes it's just a good place to be in. Never forget that your ideas matter. Sometimes if you don't go along with what everybody else is saying, it's okay. Just keep moving forward with the things that are important to you and the message that you want other people to hear. Your individual cancer matters just like the collective group cancer types message matters as well. Always think about yourself and how important your message is.
Yeah, I think that all my sort of advice is kind of a piece of the puzzle from what everyone said. Don't be afraid to ask if you can help or you can get involved, or if they want the patient voice. I've realized that as I've become an advocate, patient experience and patient viewpoint is so important. Sometimes, you know, they don't even know to ask you. They have no idea that you want to be involved. I think I've asked, and now I've told my story quite a few times, and I'm involved in so many organizations, and I get people that ask me how they can get involved, just like you were asking. Ask your cancer center, ask your cancer, you know, cancer alliance, your state cancer alliance. Ask, you know, nonprofit that's involved in your cancer. You know, get involved and realize that, you know, like everyone said, your story matters, your voice matters, and you just have to ask. Don't be afraid. I was very afraid to attend my first AYA, adolescent young adult event, but look where it led me. It led me here, surrounded by amazing experts, and I'm telling my story. I'm trying to, you know, I guess encourage you to do the same. Don't be afraid. If they say no, move on to the next organization.
I love that. Thanks, Allison. Lisa, do you have a parting words of wisdom?
Other than breathe and relax, I would say ask, you know, well, it's so true, is ask questions, and I mean that, ask the other advocates you know. Don't be afraid to ask us what this feels like. What does that look like? Because no one came into this world knowing how to advocate. And so we all have a learning process behind us, and mine is continuing. So I'm always happy to answer questions that someone has. And if I don't have the answer, I'll find someone that has it. So don't be afraid to ask those questions, even about process, that kind of thing.
So it sounds like a theme of all of your pieces of advice is don't underestimate the power of your story and your experience. And you can use that to either fine tune your advocacy voice or find your advocacy voice. And so I'm really excited that all of you could be here with us today to kick off this symposium event. And as we go into breakout sessions, all of you advocates here, superstar advocates, helped us kind of set the stage. And, you know, you're doing such great work and using your experience to improve cancer care. And we want to work with you and everybody in the audience. And so all the breakout sessions that are tailored for your level of advocacy, we're so excited for that. And all the sessions are going to be recorded. So if there are 2 or even 3 sessions that are concurrently going on and you want to see all of them, then later, tonight they will all be available. So don't worry about that. And, please engage with us and ask questions in the chat box and throughout the breakouts and then into tomorrow and the next days. And so now I'm going to kick us off into our first three breakouts. So if you would go back to your email that you received this morning at 10 a.m., the subject line is CPAT Day 1. There is a link to each breakout session. So this is the part where you get to choose your own adventure, and we are so excited to work with you and engage with you over the next couple of days, and reach out if you have any questions at all. So thank you guys for joining this great panel and for a great discussion.